Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So as a piece of that, our goal each week is to bring you something that's hopeful and helpful. So subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge podcast. If you find today's episode hopeful and helpful, then please follow or subscribe, and then rate and review so that more people can find the conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to give us a follow and turn on your notifications. Well, in today's episode, we're talking about the question, how do we grow our faith? For starters, what does it even mean to grow your faith? Why would you want to do it? How do you do it practically? And what do you do if your faith feels stale? To do this, I chat with the Executive Director of Discipleship at the Ridge, Brodie Swanson. This is my conversation with Brodie. Hello, Brodie. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always fun to have a conversation.
So I hear that Wisconsin has officially entered into the summer. Over Washington, it has not yet. So super happy for you.
And I'm so sorry.
Have you gotten into your first golf game?
Oh, yes. I have not played a full 18 yet, which is a little unusual for me, but played a bunch of 9s and have lost a lot of golf balls. So that's a good start to the year.
Perfect. I'm sure nobody listening can relate to the idea of losing a golf ball.
No, always straight and perfect. That's what golfers do.
Two things that golfers lose is golf balls and their temper.
And their mind.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, so for today's topic, I thought we could take this kind of phrase that you hear said a lot around the Ridge, around different churches, around different, I think, parts of even all sorts of different faiths in general, but particularly following Jesus, is this idea of like growing your faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that expression, I think it means something, but it can be interpreted in lots of different ways, and probably also with the question mark of like, yes, there's the idea of, yeah, I should want to do that, but maybe not necessarily everyone has a natural understanding of, hey, what exactly does that look like? What does that mean? Or even, hey, why do I want to do that in the first place? So I'd love to dive into kind of that concept with you and maybe just start off and say, hey, Brodie, what do you think it means to grow your faith?
Oh, I think it's a great question. And I think the way you set it up is really important because I think there's a lot of things in life where we grow by default and we don't have to pay attention to it. I didn't cause my legs to grow when I was a kid, and I didn't cause my arms to grow. It just seemed to happen because of, I eat and I sleep and all that stuff. But when we talk about faith, it's a little bit more like exercising a muscle. Is to say, hey, there's something there that needs to get formed and shaped a little bit more, and it just doesn't happen on its own, and it just doesn't happen by me thinking. I actually have to like go and develop that muscle. And so growing faith for me means that I'm constantly becoming a little bit more like I was created to be, which is actually a really nebulous concept because it's like, well, what was I created to be? But when we take steps to know God a little bit more, to understand who he is and how I am made, then we start to grow our faith. And then when we put it into action, then we start to grow it even a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that there's a question I get a lot, or a comment that I get many times when it comes to faith. And that is, I want to go deeper in my faith. People say that concept of deeper in faith. And I've always wondered, well, what exactly does that mean to somebody? And so have you ever heard that question from folks?
Oh, yeah. I tell them, go ahead and put on your mud boots and just dive right in.
Uh-huh.
No,
well,
I've done yeah, go ahead.
No, you.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people will share that, particularly if they've been around churches or in faith for a long time. And I think it's probably a phrase that is, I'll call it inherited. Like, I don't think anybody naturally, because I don't think that's something that's something that somebody would naturally like attune. Oh yeah, deeper. Like, I don't know if that would be something that would like, unless somebody is taught that phrase or that concept, would just pop into somebody's mind. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's probably something that somebody has learned from somebody else.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think it's a question that has a number of assumptions underneath it.
Yeah.
Um, and if you give me a second, I'd actually like to unpack that a little bit, because I think it comes into play when we're talking about how do I grow my faith. And I drew a picture. So,
Ooh,
oh
artist
yeah,
Brodie.
there's art. Okay. So
All
you
right,
have
so
this
if you're
picture.
listening on the podcast, this is your plug to check out YouTube.
There we go. So there's a picture here of a triangle, and basically what it says is many people grow up in three kind of traditions or sections of faith. Not unilaterally, but it tends to be the pattern. And one of those is, hey, I grew up where faith was more about knowledge, and a knowledge-based faith was really important. That's actually the way that I grew up in the upper Midwest. That seems to be more prevalent. Then there's another area of faith where people start to serve, and they just serve their community, they serve others, they participate in things, and that's how they originally come to understand what faith is through serving and action. And then there's a last one, and this would be some of your more mainline denominations and things like that, where it's a contemplative faith. And I know that's a huge word, but basically there's liturgy, there's silence, there's a lot of deeper thinking about smaller pieces of faith, and that's a really important part of that tradition. And when people say, hey, I want to go deeper, many times they mean the way that I naturally understand faith, whether it's knowledge based or serving based or contemplative. I need to do more of that. I want to know more, I want to do more, I want to think more. And what I've come to understand, and this isn't my brainchild, somebody figured this out, but I can't find for the life of me who it was. So I'll just take credit
We'll give you credit.
introducing
We'll
it.
give you credit.
Yeah, I'll just take credit for introducing it here. But in the end, instead of a deeper faith, meaning knowing more, serving more, or thinking more, maybe a deeper faith is if I come from a knowledge-based tradition, then I need to learn how to think more about those things and put it into action. And if I come from a serving tradition, instead of just doing more, I need to understand the why behind why I serve and think deeply about what God's calling me to do so that I maximize my impact. And if I'm contemplative, it's understanding that, I can't just be a thinker. I need to be able to understand a little bit more about the broad spectrum of things that I'm thinking about, and I got to put it into practice. And so when people say deeper, I actually think that deep is not coring down into that place. It's actually widening your faith. And that challenges us on so many levels as humans to develop our thinking, to develop the muscle of action. And so I think when we talk about growing our faith, having a deeper faith, it's thinking more widespread than narrow in our action and in our investment in our faith.
Okay, so I guess I want to bore down a little bit deeper into each one of those things really quick. To use your phrase there. I think knowledge, I think serving, I think for the most part, we can probably grasp those two pretty quickly, right? Like I gained more information about the Bible, or I gained more information about like the history of faith, things like that. Serving, I serve people more, I love people better. Great. I think and maybe this showcases my own background, but the contemplative, I think, section is probably is a little bit more of a like an airy concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you unpack that one a little bit more?
I'll try. I think that when you encounter that area of faith, you would see it more in many of the writings of what we would call the church fathers, and some ancient things. There's liturgies in the Lutheran and Catholic Church that talk about God in ways that we don't normally do it. Think about God in ways that cause us to pause. And there's a real essence of beauty talked about in all of that stuff, to where we have to step back and we have to slow down and we have to look at something around us and really encounter it for what it truly is. I don't know if this is explaining it, but it's that slowing down, it's the silence, it's the thinking about what I'm seeing and how God is located in all of that. that really comes out of some of those more Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Episcopalian traditions. And there's a real beauty to it. It just by itself causes you sometimes to slow down and be very pleased with what you discover and then do nothing with it. There's a temptation there.
So what I'm hearing you say is it's kind of like there's, I'll use a simple example, but like, it's like one corner of the triangle is I learn more about what the Bible actually says.
Yes.
Contemplative would be, okay, I reflect on some of those principles. And I kind of try to discover, hey, what do those reflections say about the bigger picture of God, how God has created me, has created the universe, and like I'm appreciative and honoring and respectful of that, which is a very different concept than I think just knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And then serving is, okay, well, now that you have these great things that you know and you've reflected on and you felt them, what do you do about it?
Yeah, there's an outflow there. So, I mean, you should have just talked it through because you said it better than I did. So
I just processing along with you, man. Okay. So I think that's really helpful. I think that's a really helpful framework to think through is like, if you're in a place where you're thinking, okay, I want a deeper faith, then, hey, pick one of these aspects that maybe like you're not naturally like doesn't naturally come natural. Wow. Great podcasting right there.
Well, it's something you're not bent towards or experienced at. And it just needs to widen your perspective a bit.
Yeah.
Is to say, whatever I naturally go towards, I need to think a little bit differently in order to think more completely about what faith is and who God is.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that I think sometimes when we have this concept of growing your faith, there's this idea that like you mentioned the deeper or like, because I think that the word faith is so easy to think of as purely like a thought exercise, right? And so what is faith? Oh, faith is my belief, which yes, yeah, that's true. There's a big element to that. But faith also manifests, right? And so as you're trying to, there's like this reciprocal, there's my big word.
There's your big $20 word.
Yeah, there's my big one. Between, I think, faith and like how it's changing you. And so it's almost like this idea of growing your faith is transforming your life, where you're moving, like you said, closer to who God made you to be. And I think there's a real, a cool aspect to that where it starts to paint the picture of, hey, when we talk about growing your faith, why in the world do we think this is an important thing? Because if it is just more understanding or things like that, like maybe that's helpful for some of your decision makings and things like that. But if it's not transforming you, it's hard to feel benefits from that.
Yeah. And I think there's a benefit, John, to taking the word faith out of a spiritual type of context for a minute to help us understand what it really is. And so on a daily basis, we exercise faith in a lot of things. I exercise faith that when I put my foot on the brake pedal, that the car is going to stop. And so the easy one is to say, hey, I put faith in the chair I'm sitting in, that it's actually going to do what it's supposed to do. And so I look at it when I approach it to make sure it looks like, hey, I understand that this is structured well. Eventually, I got to sit down on it. And that's where both of those things are aspects of faith, is really understanding it. And then also, putting my foot forward and saying, I'm going to test it a little bit.
Yeah. And then and that's like that growth point, right? Is that the more you experience the security and the catching, the more your faith grows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So maybe let's get somebody maybe listening right now and they're like, this is great. I love these kind of principles. But why in the world should I actually, like, what's the big deal about growing your faith? We talk about that. You even talk about, hey, I've heard, take your next faith step, take your next step. You're on your faith journey. Why? why is that a big deal? Why is that important? Why should I care that I grow my faith, right? Because at simplest level, we know, hey, if you do believe in Jesus, if you have faith, then, you've got the quote, I'll call it the big reward,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But we also think that there's more for you than just this idea of heaven,
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. At risk of really diving in deep, the Bible actually gives us really good understanding of why developing my faith and growing my faith is important. Um, there's a passage. I'm actually going to read it real quick.
Yeah.
It's just a real quick verse. It's 2 Peter 3:17, and we're going to come back to this area in just a few minutes. But it says this. It says, "Therefore, friends, since you have been forewarned, be on your guard, so that you may not be carried away." And I think one of the things that helps us when we grow our faith is it kind of grounds us. It helps us understand, hey, I don't have to understand everything, but I understand that this area over here is not good for me or how I was made to be. This area over here is not helpful for me or how I was made to live. This area right here, and there's a lot of black and white and there's a lot of gray all in this area here. It really helps me get grounded that these are the places that I need to be about, because that's how God created me to best live. And so first, it helps keep us grounded. I think another reason why it matters is because when we grow our faith, it helps us to avoid being confused about what my way is and what God's way is. It actually brings clarity to that. Psalm 119 says, I've hidden what you have said in the internal parts of me. My heart is what it says, so that I don't go my own way. Now, it's the Brodie paraphrase on that one, but it basically says, hey, when I start to grow my faith, when I start to understand you better and understand how you created me to be, and I hide those things deep inside of me, I write them on the core of who I am, then I'm much more likely to go the way that I'm supposed to and not turn in the way that you've asked me not to. And so growing my faith allows me to really stay in line with what God has built me to do. And life is so much different when I'm aligned with how God has created me and what he has asked me to do and how he has made me as a human. It's a much different experience. And so not only does it keep me grounded in here, it really helps me not wander into places I shouldn't. And then the last one, I think it's important to grow our faith, and why it matters is it just gives us hope. I mean, there's the hope that you talked about, that, hey, I have an eternity way out there.
Yeah.
But the other hope for me is that, I don't know about you and I don't know about others, but I actually hope that I can be the person and live the life that I was created to be and live. There's a hope inside of me that that's possible. And what I find is that I stink at getting there. I'm terrible at it. And so when I start to think about growing my faith, and when I connect to God and he teaches me things, and I connect to others and he teaches me things through them, there's a hope in me that not only do I have an eternity with him, which is super cool, but that I could actually be something here that he created me to be. And if I believe that he doesn't waste his creation, then maybe there's something impactful for me to do. And it gives me hope that that's possible.
It's a lot of good stuff, man.
Sorry, I just
No, that's really good. I think that, and there's a little bit of wiring here too, right? Where I think that probably different people are going to connect with different aspects of why growing your faith is really important. If you are somebody who you're just wired, I won't go into the Enneagram, but if you don't know yours, you should just check it out. Maybe we'll have an episode on that someday. But if you're really wired to like you're an achiever, like that's your thing, you have this major drive, I think the reality is you grow your faith because that's going to make you actually just better at life. When you're living more into the way that God has designed you to be, you're going in his direction and following his guidance. Your life's just going to have a better outlook. Now what that better outlook is, I don't know. But yeah. God has the bigger picture, right? But
Mm-hmm.
but maybe that's not your wiring. Maybe your wiring really is this, just loving of peace, and you love
Yep.
to just experience that and be in this place of peace and connecting and growing with God and growing your faith gives you more of that peace and allows you to see it, I think, more prevalent around you.
Yeah.
I could go on, right? Like maybe you're really emotionally connected and you're like, hey, guess what? You have this emotional connection with the God of the universe. And you can just take a second and be like, oh yeah, of course I want to grow with my faith because I have access to the God of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's you're hitting on something that's extremely important when you talk about growing your faith, and that is that no two people are the same.
Hmm.
And so, my journey is different from somebody else's. Your journey is different from somebody else's. My makeup is different from somebody else's, and yours is as well. And so, growing there's not a linear path. It's not like, hey, start here, and this is your next step, and everybody's there, and you're behind. It's more like, hey, this is who you are. This is what your journey's been, and now here's the next iteration of what God has for you.
Do you think that is a reason why some people can experience maybe some frustration or I'll call it the tried it, didn't work syndrome type of thing? Because maybe you're wired a specific way and you have a buddy that's like, yeah, just do this, just wake up at 4 a.m. and pray for an hour and then you'll be fine and your faith's going to grow. And you tried that and you discovered that 4 a.m. is a terrible hour of the day and closing your eyes for an hour just makes you fall asleep.
Yeah. Not nocturnal growth. That's what we call that.
Yes, exactly. So do you think a portion of it is being willing to understand how your unique wiring may be different than other people's?
Oh yeah. And I think there's, in different ways and in different places, there's been a difficulty in the past where we've sold a one size fits all faith. Like, here's what you do, and A plus B equals C. So it's just not like that. And I think in many traditions that play out that formula, the one piece that they often don't touch on very often is hearing God's voice and the role of the Holy Spirit in how we grow. And so I do think, I think your wiring has a lot to do with it.
Did you just plant that seed? You're like, now I want you to ask me about Holy Spirit.
I got it coming a little bit later if you don't. So,
yeah. No, I think that's really good. And I think it gives you a little bit of freedom to try different things. I think it gives freedom to, I think understand and explore. And I think maybe just have it be something where you can learn and take your own pace. And I think you hit on something really key when you said like there's historically been this like cookie cutter approach. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here. I think it's just what happens is what works for you is what you share with others. Right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
I mean, that's the way we're built as humans. I mean, you think about the love languages, and the way that I receive love is the way that I give love. Well, the way that I receive a connection with God is the one that I'm going to sell to everybody because it works for me.
Yeah.
It's interesting. If I may digress for a minute,
please digress away.
When I was in seminary, they did a survey of the student body, and the one question was, when do you feel like you're most connected to God? And I talked to the professors ahead of time because I just enjoy these kinds of conversations. And they're like, well, we know what the answer is going to be already. I don't know why we're doing the survey. And I was like, oh, really? So what do you think the answer is going to be? And they were like, well, of course it's going to be when they read the Bible, because that's the way that everybody feels connected to God. 80% of the student body had something different. And most of them said, I feel most connected to God when I listen to music that either talks about beauty or talks about him. And I was like, it was fascinating. And so it just goes to prove your point that, makeup what's available to us as generations. I mean,
Yeah.
you think about people in the 16th century, they're probably not talking about music because they didn't carry around a handheld device that they could play it. And there was, so there's different times, different seasons, and different generations that are going to connect to God differently. And I think it's probably cyclical and stuff comes back, but I think it's just something to keep in mind so that we don't look at ourselves and say, why isn't this working for me? Well, maybe it's not working for you because it's not you. And now you get to try something else.
Do you have any advice for somebody who's like, they're trying to discover what exactly their wiring is in relation to how they can grow their faith? Because I imagine, and frankly, maybe this is a helpful tool. Like if you're listening and maybe you're just like, you're knocking this growing your faith thing out of the park. Maybe this conversation is a really helpful tool because it's going to equip you to be able to chat with somebody who maybe isn't, or maybe it's your kid, maybe it's a friend who's like, yeah, I mean, I believe, but it doesn't really matter. It's like, oh, well, have you tried doing this type of thing? Because I know that you're wired this way.
Mm-hmm. So I think that, and this is probably a link you can put next to this podcast, is there's a assessment that you can take that's pretty quick to take about spiritual pathways. And it basically allows you to go through a self-discovery process to say, hey, where would I feel most connected in general? And where do I feel most connected to God? And for some people, it's when they're in nature. For some people, it's when they're in silence. For some people, it's when they're in a group of people. For some people, it's when they're reading their Bible. And I think if I were to give advice to somebody, I would start with that link and just start to discover themselves. But I also think that you'll find that the way that now I'm going to try this out, so you may delete this after a bit. But anyways, I think that the way that you connect to humans and to life in general is also probably part of your wiring of connecting to God. If you're normally an introvert and a one-on-one person, then you're probably going to experience something connective when you're in a one-on-one situation or when you're by yourself. If you normally connect to the world around you through relationship and whatever, then probably a lot of the input that you're going to receive in growing spiritually is going to come from other people. And you just got to surround yourself with the right people. That's an important part of that whole thing. So it's not like you're going to live your life in this arena and then suddenly to connect to God, you have to completely switch who you are because now this is how you do it. It's much more of a built-in flow, and you just get to discover that through self-discovery.
I love that. Yeah, we'll link that in the notes. And I think, do you think that's something that could change over time?
I do. I think that about all of the different things. I mean, you take all of these assessments that you take, the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram, and you're not going to radically shift from one place to the other, most likely, but you are going to change and grow and shape a little bit differently as you grow both older and as you go through seasons. I think there's different things that are brought to the surface.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so with that in mind, like what other maybe some practical things that somebody can do? There's like, you know what? They heard you talk about the triangle and they're like, yes, you know what? I want to go deeper by going wider. I want to, I want to try growing my faith. What are some practical things that maybe can help us stay motivated, can help us grow? What are some things that you could recommend?
So let's go on the motivation piece first.
Yes, please.
Okay. So it's hard to stay motivated. I don't know about you, but I started off this year thinking, okay, not only am I going to lose, 50 pounds and be in the best shape of my life, but I'm going to eat more healthy and stuff like that. It's just hard to stay motivated unless there's something out in front of you. And so I think the first part of staying motivated and actually doing the practical things is you got to decide that you want it. It's that way in every part of our life. If you really want it and it's not just something that you want for a minute, then you're going to do the stuff that it takes to move that direction. So it's a question to ask yourself, do I really want this, or does somebody else want this for me? And I am just trying to lean into that. That's a big question for me because there's a lot of pressure sometimes for me to be like, well, somebody else wants this for me. They want me in better shape. They want me to live longer. And I still want to eat cheeseburgers. And so, so that's the first part of it. Do you really want it? The second thing I think in staying motivated is you have to learn to celebrate growth, really small steps of growth and big steps of growth, because I think sometimes we just keep looking forward and what do I need to do next? And what am I not doing? And what level am I not at? Instead of going, hey, I actually prayed 3 days this week and it was meaningful. Okay, let's mark that. Let's go out for a cheeseburger and celebrate that.
Hey.
But I think celebrating growth, both in myself and others, is the first way to stay motivated to keep going, because you start to see that changes are happening and you're starting to see that it matters. And so keeping an eye on the things that are happening.
Yeah, really quick. What do you have any like recommended things that you'd say to celebrate? Because I know that might not be a natural thing for some people.
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing practical is just to acknowledge it. I think sometimes we're so busy that we don't acknowledge it. The second thing would be write it down, because it's easy to forget, especially when we get into a season where we're like, oh, I feel like I'm just going backwards. Write it down. And then have some people around you that are watching for it too, because I can celebrate by myself, but pretty soon celebrating by myself doesn't actually do anything. But if somebody around me is, and when I say celebrate, it's not like confetti and throw a party, but it's just acknowledging and feeling a sense of action and a sense of growth and a sense of fulfillment from a small or big thing. And if you have people around you that are watching for it too, it makes a huge difference. And cheeseburgers help.
One thing I'd add to that is I think that there can be this hesitancy that we feel to celebrate things that are expected of us. And I think that there's an element of validity to that. Like, you didn't yell at me. Great. So there's an element to that I get and understand. But I think especially when it comes to like faith things where it's like, there's this, I don't want to call it like a Christian guilt, but there's like this pressure, right? Where it's like, okay, I know I'm supposed to do, but I didn't, it's okay. Like you're saying, to acknowledge and embrace and celebrate the thing that you were, quote, supposed to do. And you did, and not feel as though, I think that's like that. That's the concept that I would say. Like,
can I interject?
Please.
Can I interject and tell you, I think a flag should go up in your mind when you say the word should to yourself. I think that's where my dad would say, stop shoulding all over yourself. And so
you gotta be real careful when you say that.
I know, but in the end, I think you bring up a really good point. Is like, well, I should do it, so it's not worth celebrating. It's just expected. But actually, celebrating the small things is what brings life to the day to day. And if you can do that in small ways, it just builds confidence, it builds momentum, and it builds awareness. And when we are aware of what's going on around us, we're going to see God a whole lot more.
Yeah, that's really good.
So that's first thing, celebrating. I think second thing is get to know yourself. If you want to stay motivated, get to know yourself, because and this one, when I say that, I say dig in. You talk about the Enneagram. I talk about the Myers-Briggs. You talk about the DISC. You talk about some of these assessments that are out there that you can get for free most places, and then watch yourself in different situations and observe your own behaviors, because I guarantee the more you get to know yourself, this is the frustrating part of this, the more you'll see the gaps. And the more you'll say, oh, there's where I can grow. There's where I can grow. Oh, that's what I can celebrate. And so getting to know yourself, I think we don't take enough time to do that. And when I talk about that, so I'll just give you 5 real quick ways. If you're a follower of Jesus and you understand what spiritual gifts are, getting to know your spiritual gifts. is a good thing, because then you can understand more how to employ them and put them into practice. Your heart, what really gets you going, and get to know that, because when you figure out what you become passionate about, then you're going to see how God is going to grow you so you can actually do that to a greater extent. Your abilities, get to know your abilities, and what are you putting into practice for the use of what God has asked you to, and what he hasn't. Your personality, your experience. I mean, it takes the word shape, and that's not my acronym, but if you look at some of those ideas and you start to get to know yourself, you're automatically going to see places where, I've really grown in this, and here's some places where I still need to grow, because if I'm going to put this into action, that's a place that's going to need growth.
Yeah, that's really good. And I mean, just to build on that, it's helpful to know like what actually motivates you, right? So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're a goals person, maybe it's a goal. If you're a like a little rewards person,
Mm-hmm.
then having a little reward, and just knowing the things that, like you said, like knowing yourself is just a really powerful tool.
Yes,
Um, yeah.
across the board. And then I would say the last way to get motivated is just get in the game. I coach basketball, and if we took our fourth and fifth grade players and decided we're just going to practice all the time, you're going to dribble, you're going to shoot, you're going to learn all these great skills, and then there was nothing to do with them, after a while they wouldn't grow anymore, because they weren't in situations where they had to use something and figure out, oh, here's where I need to grow. Here's how I could use that differently. Here's how that impacts something. And so making sure that you're growing in your faith is not just a theoretical construct. It's actually, hey, get in the game, get into it. You're going to fall on your face sometimes. That's okay. But you're going to learn how to grow and how to do things differently. And God really works in those spaces inside of us.
Yeah, that's super practical. And speaking of practical, there's my little segue.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, any practical things that you would recommend to, like, when somebody says like, hey, how do I grow my faith?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the motivation, you mentioned the why behind it.
Yeah.
Any practical things that somebody can do?
Yeah. So I'll go extremely practical for a minute, and then there's a couple of basic concepts that I think are practical as well. I think thinking about how a plant grows. We talk about growing our faith. You think about a plant that grows, and the first thing you need is good soil for that seed to grow in. And so, what are you surrounding yourself with? I think that's a really solid question. Who are you surrounding yourself with? What are you surrounding yourself with? Be in community. I think that's hugely important. I think the second thing that a plant needs to grow and that we need to grow is that something needs to water it. There needs to be a source of life. And I think we live in a day and age we are so fortunate, because we have the Bible. They've had the Bible for centuries, but now we have instant access to things like podcasts, like this one, but also hundreds of others, where you can hear from the perspectives of people, and they can breathe into your life so that you're growing, because they are giving input, and they might not even be within 1,000 miles of your house. And so think about what you're using to water yourself, not only the Bible, not only those voices, but then where is God's voice in that piece? And we could do a whole podcast, and I hope we will sometime, on what about hearing God's voice? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? Is it as weird as it sounds? And what is the impact if I actually hear his voice and obey? There's some super cool stuff, but I think that's a huge important piece as far as practical things. I think in the end, you look at a plant and it starts to grow. It needs sun, and you just need to open yourself to say, God, how would you have me grow, and can you help me in that type of thing? And then if you watch a tree grow, eventually it has a purpose, and that makes that tree important, whether it's to give shade, whether it's to whatever, whether it's to be part of what we create in this world. And so I think finding your purpose and finding a purpose for a little while. I know people at the Ridge who have come in and they found their purpose opening a door to welcome people in. And about a year later, they're like, okay, I did that, but now I feel like there's something else that I'm being asked to do. Can I explore? And realizing that finding purpose during each season is a really important part of growing your faith, because otherwise it's like doing math and never needing to use it. You just know how to do it, but it doesn't make a difference. And so finding your purpose is huge. So those are things where I would say, find places to do it, find inputs into you, and then where does God do his work in you? Those are the practical pieces that I would say. But let me back out a little bit and say, as humans, growing in anything, rhythm is more important than a sprint. And so I will tell you that in January, when I wanted to get on my health kick, I stopped drinking caffeine. I didn't eat any fast food for the month. I was feeling good. And you know what? Last week I ate fast food 5 times, and I still drink water, but I drink an awful lot of caffeine as well. And so we're prone to say, man, I'm just going to get after it, and I want to see big differences. And what I would say is, build a rhythm into your life that's sustainable. If 4 a.m. reading your Bible and praying is not sustainable, what is? Is it the verse of the day on YouVersion? And that for a while is a sustainable rhythm for you to go, I'm just going to listen to what God says to me through that verse of the day. Or, I'm going to look at a study once a week on Right Now Media, or I'm going to read a book, something like that. But something that's sustainable and consistent, that's how we grow as humans. And so rhythm is more important than a sprint. The second, practical is better than theory. Now, there are some people who would argue with me on this one, and they have a lot more smarts than I do. But what I would tell you is, when it comes to growing faith, understanding the theory of God is much different than experiencing God in the midst of my life. And so what I would say is, if you're going to try to grow your faith, put yourself out there so that God has to join you in that space where you feel like you're taking a step out of your comfort zone, because it's a whole lot more fun to experience God in that place than to just try to understand him theoretically, because it's hard as far as that goes. And then the last one is, name your pillars. What are the pillars that hold up your faith? And I don't know that will be a language that most people understand, but back in the old days, buildings had pillars on the front that would hold up a lot of the weight of the building. And for me, my pillars in growing my faith personally are, I need to get together with other people. I need to be in community. And that's a hard one for me, but it's important. And the second one is, I need to be connected to God in a quiet way, but also I need to be connected to 1 or 2 others so that I don't live an isolated life. And that's a pillar for me, is, hey, there's got to be 1 or 2 people that know me deeply, that are actually going to understand a relationship with God, and we're going to have those conversations together on a regular basis. And then the third one is, I need to do stuff. I need to serve. And the way that we define that in our family is, if you walk into a place, you ask the question, what needs to be done? And you do it. And that's serving wherever you go. And so if I'm in my neighborhood and something needs to be done, I'm serving my neighborhood. If I'm in public and something needs to be done and I can do it without getting arrested or in trouble, I'm going to go do that. If there's someone around me that I can do something for, that it's healthy and helpful, then I need to step into that, even if it's not comfortable sometimes. And so those are the pillars of my faith growing, because it's about being known internally, because I can isolate sometimes. And it's about making sure that I'm living it out and not just having it up here. So does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think it does. I think it's what keeps you mentioned the phrase grounded, but it almost seems like those pillars are things that support holistically the whole process. So it's keeping you on track. You've discovered, hey, these are the things that if I know that I do them, it's almost like you can't help but move forward because you have those things in place. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be interested to hear what yours are, but that's putting you on the spot. So.
Yes. And unfortunately, we're out of time. No.
Conveniently.
Yeah. So. No. Brodie, thank you so much for sharing and diving deep into this. And I think it's so valuable, because I think it's a chance to take a step back from a common phrase or concept we say, and take a look and say, okay, what does this really mean? And how can I make this come to fruition in my life? And so thanks for giving us a lot of practical stuff to combine with the theoretical. So I hope we cover the head and the heart, and the feet, I guess, would be the practical. So there we go.
You got me.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Well,
Brodie.
thanks for having me on, John. It's always a pleasure.
Well, that was my conversation with Brodie, and I think more than anything, this just highlights how important it is to have a good understanding of yourself and how you connect with others, the world, and God. That's going to be so helpful when you think through how you can grow your faith, because it's your faith. It's not anybody else's. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. Make sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge